My name is Nathaniel Nate Crow, and what unfolded in that boardroom 3 days ago wasn't just an ending. It was the spark that ignited a reckoning. But to understand how a man who had devoted 23 years to Atlas Dynamics was publicly humiliated and yet walked out holding the strings of power, you need to know about the golden cufflinks in my pocket and the phone call that came on a quiet Sunday evening 72 hours earlier. I remember the moment everything went sideways like it happened yesterday. The orchids I carried were perfect, steady in my hands. A simple gesture, I told myself. A bouquet for Victoria Steele, the new CEO. 23 years at Atlas Dynamics had taught me that respect and loyalty were more enduring than titles. I wanted her first morning to feel like she was joining a team, a family even, not just a corporation. But the instant I stepped into the boardroom, the air shifted. Victoria didn't smile. She didn't glance at the flowers. Instead, she straightened her jacket and said with a cold precision that cut through the tension, "Nathaniel Crow, your time here is over." Her words didn't land immediately. Around the table, 2 freshly promoted vice presidents sat rigid, pens hovering as if waiting for me to argue. I scanned Victoria's face, hunting for a flicker of humor, a sign this was some cruel joke. There was none. She slid a manila envelope across the polished oak table toward me, her gaze flat, dismissive. My brain refused to compute. 23 years of grueling deadlines, midnight calls, and crisis management condensed into one merciless moment. No thank you, no acknowledgement, just the cold efficiency of an execution. The humiliation escalated when Victoria leaned forward, voice carrying through the room so every colleague could hear. "This," she said, tapping the envelope with her manicured fingernail, "is the start of a new culture. Atlas must shed its relics, and Nathaniel's departure will signal our commitment to change." Gasps punctuated the silence. I felt every pair of eyes on me, not with respect, but with pity. My bouquet of orchids suddenly seemed ridiculous, their fragrance heavy in the stale corporate air. I set them down gently on a side table, my pulse hammering. If you're drawn to stories where the underestimated rise and experience meets arrogance head-on, you already know the kind of tale this is. Every day I've lived through new stories like this, thrilling, tense, unrelenting, but nothing compared to what was about to happen. I picked up the envelope, my fingers brushing the gold cufflinks in my pocket, my personal talisman, gifted to me on my 23rd anniversary with the company. The name N. Crow glinted faintly in the fluorescent light, grounding me against the tidal wave of humiliation. Here's what Victoria didn't know, what no one in that room knew. 2 days prior, I had quietly acquired the majority of Atlas Dynamics' outstanding shares from its founder, Leonard Marshall. Victoria may have believed she was orchestrating a public spectacle, but she had no idea her moment of triumph would instead plant the seeds of her undoing. 2 days before the boardroom disaster, the phone rang late on a quiet Sunday evening. I almost ignored it, desperate for the solace of a book, trying to quiet the gnawing anxiety that accompanied rumors of a new CEO. But the name flashing on the screen froze me. Leonard Marshall. Leonard wasn't just the founder of Atlas Dynamics. To many of us, he was the lifeblood of the company. Retired for years, weary of constant battles with investors and board politics, his shadow still lingered in every corner of The morning of Victoria Steele's first day as CEO began like any other, or so I thought. The orchids rested on the side table, their fragrance a silent witness to the storm about to unfold. I straightened my jacket, rehearsing the casual smile I'd flash as I greeted her. After 23 years, Atlas Dynamics was my second home. I knew the faces,
the rhythms, the subtle hierarchies that guided the company. And I knew how to survive corporate shifts. But survival wasn't the question anymore. Not today. When I stepped into the boardroom, I felt the room's temperature drop, not physically, but in a way that only tension can create. Victoria was already there, standing tall, eyes scanning the assembled executives like a predator evaluating its prey. I extended the bouquet, a simple gesture. My fingers brushed the paper ribbon, smooth under my touch. She didn't acknowledge it, didn't even glance. Instead, she adjusted her jacket and said, "Nathaniel Crow, your time here is over." The words struck like a hammer. I felt my heartbeat stutter. Around the table, two newly promoted vice presidents froze, pens in hand, waiting for me to explode. I searched Victoria's expression for any sign this was a joke, a cruel, elaborate prank. Nothing. She slid a manila envelope across the table, her eyes unreadable, cold. My mind spun. 23 years of late nights, crisis management, and boardroom battles, all of it reduced to a single moment of corporate execution. No thanks, no acknowledgement, just a severing as precise as a scalpel. Then she leaned forward, voice clear and commanding. "This," tapping the envelope with her manicured nail, "marks the beginning of a new era. Atlas Dynamics must shed its old structures. Nathaniel's departure signals our commitment to change." A stunned silence followed. I felt the eyes of every executive on me, not with respect, but with pity. My bouquet suddenly seemed ridiculous, an anachronism in this calculated ritual of humiliation. I set it gently on the side table, inhaling its floral weight like a counterbalance to the sting of embarrassment. I picked up the envelope, fingers brushing the golden cufflinks in my pocket, their engraved N. Crow glinting faintly in the fluorescent light. They were my anchor, my reminder that my story wasn't over. Victoria straightened, clearly satisfied with the spectacle she thought she orchestrated. She had no idea that the real story, the one that mattered, was hidden in plain sight. 2 days earlier, when Leonard Marshall handed me the papers, the cufflinks, and the keys to Atlas Dynamics' future, he had made one thing perfectly clear: wait for the right moment. Let them think they have the upper hand. Then act. And that moment, I realized as I watched Victoria take her seat behind the executive chair, had arrived. I walked to the side, glanced down at the golden cufflinks, and let a faint, almost imperceptible smirk touch my lips. The room might have thought it had seen the end of Nathaniel Crow. But the real story, the one that would leave its mark on Atlas Dynamics, was just beginning. The seeds of rebellion, carefully planted, were about to bloom.
The day wore on, each hour thick with the hum of computers and murmurs of cautious executives. Yet beneath the normal rhythms of Atlas Dynamics, a storm was quietly brewing. Victoria Steele, confident in her apparent triumph, began issuing memos, arranging meetings, and assigning new priorities that she thought would signal the company's fresh direction. Every move she made, however, only tightened the web I had been weaving. I returned to my office, closed the door, and let out a slow breath. The golden cufflinks rested on my desk like silent sentinels. Their weight wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. They represented trust, legacy, and now power. Leonard Marshall's faith in me had given me a weapon far more potent than anger: patience. Patience and timing. Over the next few hours, I meticulously reviewed the company's financial reports, shareholder records, and internal communications. To an outsider, it might have looked like routine diligence, but I wasn't merely going through documents. I was mapping out the skeleton of a strategy designed to reclaim control in a way Victoria would never anticipate. Every contract, every note, every shareholder letter was another piece of the puzzle. The phone rang mid-afternoon. I didn't need to look at the screen. I already knew who it was. Nate, Leonard's voice was calm but firm. Keep your schedule clear tomorrow. It's time to prepare the board for what's coming. I nodded silently, though he couldn't see me. Understood. I spent the evening drafting emails that seemed mundane but carried subtle instructions. Notes to the finance team about upcoming reports. Messages to legal counsel regarding procedural verifications. Each one crafted so that when the moment arrived, I would have an unassailable position. Victoria, unaware of my newly acquired controlling interest, would believe she still held power. Night fell, and the city lights cast long shadows across my office. I took a moment to look at the golden cufflinks again, twisting them between my fingers. 23 years of devotion, loyalty, and late nights had led me here. Not to vengeance, not to theatrics, but to reclamation, to justice measured in precision, not emotion. The following morning, I arrived early at the boardroom, well before Victoria. The staff moved about, placing chairs, arranging documents, and preparing for the first official board meeting under her leadership. Victoria entered with her usual confidence, unaware of the transformation that had already taken place on paper and in the hearts of key stakeholders. I waited until the meeting began, until every eye was on Victoria as she launched into her opening address about innovation, reform, and shaping the future. Her words were polished, rehearsed, precise. And then it was my turn. I stood, the golden cufflinks catching the fluorescent light, and I spoke slowly, deliberately. Before we proceed, I believe the board should review the ownership records, I said. Victoria's confident smile faltered. She glanced at the documents on the table, but I continued. Effective 2 days ago, the controlling interest of Atlas Dynamics, 48%, was transferred to me. The room went silent. Executives shifted in their seats, some gasping, others staring in disbelief. Victoria's calculated aura of authority was crumbling with every second. The power she thought she wielded so effortlessly was evaporating before the very eyes she intended to impress. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The golden cufflinks glinted in the fluorescent light, symbols of legacy, trust, and my reclamation. Years of strategy, patience, and quiet preparation had all led to this precise moment. Victoria, realizing her miscalculation, straightened her jacket and attempted a calm, authoritative tone. "Nathaniel, you can't. This isn't." I cut her off, gently but firmly. "On the contrary, Victoria, it is exactly what it is. The documents speak for themselves. Atlas Dynamics remains committed to growth and innovation, but leadership must also reflect legal reality and proven dedication." Gasps, murmurs, and subtle nods rippled through the boardroom. The executives who had once sat silently now shifted, some aligning themselves subtly with my stance, understanding that history was unfolding. Victoria had underestimated decades of experience, loyalty, and quiet maneuvering. As the days following the boardroom revelation were tense, electrified with unspoken questions and calculated glances. Atlas Dynamics corridors buzzed with speculation. Whispers of the ownership transfer spread faster than any corporate memo could travel. Victoria Steele, who had entered the company believing herself in command, now navigated a landscape subtly reshaped by my presence. Her confidence, once unshakable, now carried an edge of caution, an awareness that her moves were being measured with an unblinking eye. I watched it all with measured calm. Every interaction, every meeting, every offhand remark was a chess move, and I had been playing for decades. My decades of service, my deep understanding of the company's machinery, and the trust Leonard Marshall had invested in me were all assets that Victoria could neither buy nor fake. That afternoon, I received a call from the finance department. "Nate, some investors want to meet you immediately," the voice on the other end said. "They've heard about the ownership documents." I smiled. The wheels were turning exactly as planned. "Schedule them for tomorrow morning," I replied, my tone calm, controlled, precise. Evenings were spent meticulously reviewing the company's strategic initiatives, now filtered through the lens of my new authority. Every proposal Victoria submitted, every policy she tried to implement, I evaluated not only for its business sense, but also for its political impact. I had learned long ago that leadership is as much about perception as it is about execution. And perception, in this case, was everything. The next morning, the first investor meeting under my control began in the same boardroom where Victoria had publicly humiliated me. The irony was palpable. I arrived early, letting the tension build naturally. When the investors filed in, Victoria attempted to speak first, her voice polished and commanding. But I didn't interrupt immediately. I let her words echo, watched her carefully, and waited. Timing, after all, is a weapon. Finally, I stood. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady. "Before we discuss projections and strategies, it's important to acknowledge the current structure of ownership at Atlas Dynamics. Effective 2 days ago, I hold controlling interest in the company. These documents, I laid them on the table with deliberate weight, are legally binding and fully verified." The room fell silent. Victoria's composure wavered slightly, the carefully constructed mask cracking at the edges. Investors whispered to one another, eyes flicking from me to the documents and back again. The balance of authority had shifted palpably. For the first time, it was not Victoria leading the room, but me. I guided the meeting with precision, addressing questions with facts, figures, and strategy. I let Victoria interject occasionally, but always redirected the discussion subtly, asserting my control without overt confrontation. Every executive, every investor, every board member could see that the true leadership had shifted. Victoria's vision, ambition, and energy were undeniable, but now they existed under my oversight, guided by experience and authority that no amount of arrogance could override. By the time the meeting concluded, the investors were not only convinced of the company's stability, they were impressed by the depth of leadership and strategic foresight I brought. Whispers of admiration and cautious approval replaced the murmurs of uncertainty that had spread the day before. Victoria, who entered expecting triumph, left the room with a subtle, reluctant acknowledgement that the dynamics had changed. Returning to my office, I placed the golden cufflinks carefully on my desk. Their weight, once symbolic, now represented real power and responsibility. I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The moment was not of vengeance or spectacle, but of justice, patient, precise, and undeniable. Later that evening, Victoria knocked softly on my office door. I gestured for her to enter. Her voice was measured, cautious, the confidence she had worn like armor replaced by a subtle humility. "Nathaniel," she said, carefully choosing her words, I underestimated your position. I see now the reality of the situation. I want to work with you." I studied her for a long moment, the golden cufflinks blinking under the desk lamp. In that pause, I considered not just the power dynamics, but the future of the company, the employees, and the legacy Leonard Marshall had entrusted to me. Finally, I nodded. "Atlas Dynamics is bigger than any one of us," I said softly. "I am willing to work together, but the rules have changed. Respect and loyalty are no longer optional."
Victoria exhaled, a subtle acknowledgement of the new order. It was not defeat in the dramatic sense. It was a recalibration, a recognition that the company's leadership was now grounded in experience, foresight, and legal authority, not performance alone. That night, as I walked to the quiet halls of Atlas Dynamics, the golden cufflinks secure in my pocket, I realized something profound. Power is not seized in moments of spectacle. Power is built quietly, patiently, through trust, loyalty, and preparation. And when the moment comes, it manifests with clarity and precision. The storm had passed, but its echoes would resonate for years to come. Atlas Dynamics was mine to guide, and the lessons of patience, timing, and strategy were now etched not just into the company's records, but into its very culture.
The weeks that followed were a study in subtlety and influence. Atlas Dynamics was no longer just a company. It had become a stage where patience, strategy, and loyalty played out in real time. Victoria Steele adjusted to her new role under my oversight, her confidence tempered by the knowledge that the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. She learned quickly that titles alone do not command respect, and that experience, coupled with quiet authority, can outweigh even the most polished ambition. I spent the mornings reviewing operational reports, the afternoons meeting with department heads, and the evenings strategizing with Leonard Marshall, whose trust in me had set the stage for this transformation. Every decision was deliberate, calculated, and informed by decades of knowledge I had accumulated within the company's walls. Every choice reinforced the stability of Atlas Dynamics and the legitimacy of my leadership. Victoria, ever ambitious, attempted several initiatives meant to demonstrate innovation and control, but now every proposal was filtered through my oversight. Some she accepted gracefully, others were revised subtly, guided by facts and precedents she could not ignore. The transformation was not about confrontation, it was about establishing respect for experience and authority. By the end of the first month, the board, investors, and staff had all adjusted to the new reality. Nathaniel Crowe was not just a figurehead, he was the company's guardian. One particular afternoon, an unexpected challenge emerged. A high-profile investor, skeptical of the sudden shift in leadership, requested an urgent meeting. Victoria prepared meticulously, hoping to assert her influence. I, however, walked into the room armed with data, documentation, and a strategy honed over decades. As the investor questioned her proposals, I presented the facts: ownership documents, strategic analyses, and historical performance records, layered with calm authority. The investor listened, initially skeptical, but gradually leaned forward, nodding. By the meeting's conclusion, the investor's doubts had dissipated, replaced by recognition of the careful, precise leadership guiding Atlas Dynamics. Victoria, who once commanded attention effortlessly, now took cues from my direction, acknowledging the reality she could not alter. Returning to my office, I took a moment to look at the golden cufflinks resting on my desk. They had witnessed the turning point, the transformation from humiliation to control, from doubt to affirmation. Their weight was more than symbolic. It was a reminder that every strategic move, every patient calculation, had its reward. That evening, Victoria approached once more. This time her tone was measured, almost respectful. "Nathaniel, I realize now that my approach was premature. You've earned this position. I want to contribute meaningfully under your guidance." I studied her carefully, weighing her words. The past humiliation, the arrogance she had displayed, the public spectacle she had orchestrated, it all mattered. Yet I recognized the value she could still bring to the company. Leadership, after all, is not merely about asserting dominance. It's about harnessing the strengths of those around you. "Atlas Dynamics is bigger than any one person," I said quietly, locking eyes with her. "Your ambition can be an asset, but only if it aligns with the company's mission and values. We move forward together, but with clarity and accountability." She nodded, a subtle understanding passing between us. The dynamic had changed. Power was no longer assumed. It was earned, recognized, and verified. Weeks later, the staff whispered about the remarkable turnaround, the subtle power shifts, and the extraordinary precision with which the company's new leadership navigated challenges. Investors expressed renewed confidence, and morale improved. Atlas Dynamics was thriving, not because of dramatic gestures or sudden firings, but because strategy, patience, and loyalty now defined its leadership. One evening, as I left the office and walked through the quiet city streets, the golden cufflinks in my pocket reminded me of everything that had led to this moment. Humiliation, preparation, patience, and precise action had transformed a public spectacle into a testament to strategic authority. I smiled to myself, understanding that true power is not seized in moments of arrogance, but earned through foresight and perseverance. Leonard Marshall's trust, Victoria Steele's ambition, the board's uncertainty, all of it had coalesced into a lesson I would carry for the rest of my life. Atlas Dynamics was not just a company. It was a reflection of every calculated choice, every act of patience, and every commitment to loyalty and excellence. As the city lights flickered and the night settled around me, I realized this story was not merely about revenge or even victory. It was about understanding the rhythm of power, the patience to wait for the right moment, and the wisdom to act with precision. And as long as I held the golden cufflinks, I knew I would continue to guide Atlas Dynamics, strong, respected, and unassailable. The chapter that had begun with humiliation had ended in quiet triumph. And in that triumph lay the ultimate lesson. Experience, patience, and loyalty are far more potent than arrogance, ambition, or spectacle. The company was mine to protect, the board's respect earned, and the legacy of decades secured. Nathaniel Crowe had risen, not with theatrics, but with precision, foresight, and the quiet power of patience.